Wow, thank you. Wow. A full house. This is wonderful. So welcome, curious people, seekers. Some of you are psychonauts and friends. I'm Brian Wexler, the founder of the Palm Springs Psychedelic Society. I'm with my colleagues who I couldn't have done this without a lot of people, but with Dr. Bill Bastian, Dr. Johnny Ninos, Maggie Shelton, and Ron Diliberto. They've been instrumental in helping to develop our group and this whole thing coming together. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Love you guys. So again, a quick thank you to those two who have supported us, because we kind of went on a media spree. So those who are kind of behind the scenes, Tim Raines, I don't know if you're here, I hope so, and the Palm Springs Cultural Center staff, Michael and Eric and others, you guys have been great. Thank you so much. Emma Sasick, health reporter with the Desert Sun. She did a really nice interview with Zach. Thank you, Desert Sun. Charles Drapkin with Coachella Valley Independent. Yesterday, KESQ and I on the Desert staff. They were terrific. Kristen Olson, thank you for your support, for putting it out to thousands of people. Appreciate it. And the KGA staff, John Taylor, Dr. Renzo Corzano. Renzo, thank you. You brought your buddies. Great little clip, episode 25. It was great. Thank you so much. Also, some people behind the scenes, very special mystic, KB, you know who you are. An anonymous supporter who, I haven't seen you, but he insisted on remaining anonymous. I would call him out, but thank you for your support. And again, this Palm Springs Psychedelic Society was a lot of work, a lot of people involved. It's been a great journey. We pretty much started this in 2023, in late 23. And the idea was to get together mostly healthcare professionals so that we could collaborate and learn more about the medication and learn to answer our patients' questions. Because my experience is that 1 out of 3 patients that I see, when I ask them specifically about alcohol or drugs or cigarettes, I have to follow up. Have you ever used any psychedelic medicine? And 1 in 3 are saying yes. And I say, are you currently? Surprisingly a lot. In microdosing, macrodosing, people are telling me, oh yeah, I just got back from an ayahuasca journey. It's pretty remarkable. So, you know, among our group, we've got physicians, we have nurses, DNPs, acupuncturists, psychologists, social worker colleagues, other therapists, MFTs, yoga teachers. My wife, who's also helped tremendously. She was going to do this for me, but I told her I think I got it. But thank you. I love you. Thank you. And also energy healers, you know, Arlene and others. Thank you so much for your support. So one aspect of our work as a community health initiative is to provide community education and support. So today's event is our very first community education event. And so thank you. This is a big deal for us. Our local society is one of 300 international member groups of the Global Psychedelic Society, and they have a mission to advocate for responsible use of psychedelic substances, for personal and collective growth, for healing, and for spiritual exploration. Also, to support our mission, we collaborate with allies in social, political, scientific institutions, and work towards changing existing laws and policies to promote research and safe access to psychedelic substances. Through the power of community, and yes, that means you, we seek to shift the cultural dialogue surrounding psychedelics towards more compassionate and productive narratives. One of the initiatives of our society is to support decriminalization of natural plant medicine. The founder of Decriminalize Nature is Larry Norris. He sent us a short clip, and I'd like to share that with you right now.
We should get out of the way of the screen.
All right. Let's see. Yeah.
Hello, Palm Springs Psychedelic Society community and the Decriminalize Nature Palm Springs community. Thank you so much for giving us a little bit of time today to share about an upcoming event. Hey Zach, how you doing? Nice to see you, and virtually, and hopefully we can continue our conversations that we had at the Psychedelic Science 25 conference recently in Denver. I'm here to promote this upcoming event on August 9th in Palm Springs to share about the Decriminalize Nature movement. My name is Larry Norris. For those of you who don't know, Decriminalize Nature is a movement that started in Oakland, California in 2019 and effectively decriminalized mushrooms with psilocybin and psilocin, plant combinations similar to ayahuasca that contain DMT, plants that have ibogaine, and cacti that have mescaline. And it's been such an incredible movement. It's now grown to 29 cities nationwide. About 4 million people have lived in an area that's decriminalized through municipalities through our approach. And if you include Colorado, you're looking at about 9 to 10 million people nationwide that now live in a decriminalized area. But we need more support in California. So how are we going to do that? We're going to bring people together in Palm Springs and other cities in the state, which also moves the needle nationwide. So we've already passed now in 6 cities in California. We have Oakland, where we started, San Francisco, Berkeley, Arcata, Eureka, and Santa Cruz. And now Palm Springs, it's your turn to get on board and share with your community and your elected officials. This is good for personal spiritual growth. This is good for mental health. This is good for just learning what it is to be a human being on planet Earth, and we shouldn't be throwing people in jail and wasting our resources on something like running a country. So come on August 9th, find out a little bit more about the Decriminalize Nature movement. Help support your local Decriminalize Nature Palm Springs team. Thank you to Brian, to Maggie, to Ron, to John, and to Bill for all your support so far, and I'm looking forward to having a great event, and see you soon. Bye-bye now.
All right, yeah, this is really the beginning of a movement of educating and sharing. So again, Larry will be here Saturday, August 9th, 1 month from today. We don't know the exact venue yet, but it will be posted. We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Blue Sky. There's a website, psychedelicsociety.org. But we'll be sending the information. It will be a free event. And again, so more information to follow. And ideally, with community support, we will be the 7th city in California which will support deprioritization, decriminalization of natural plant medicine. So we're looking forward to that. So now on to our main event, a little bit about Zach Leary. Over the course of the last 30 years, Zach has found himself in the center of the psychedelic movement with a front row seat for the modern Renaissance, while also having firsthand knowledge of the historical legacy of the counterculture's influence on psychedelic exploration. Since his childhood, he's been in the presence of luminaries. His father, Timothy Leary, Ram Dass, Oscar Gieniger, Humphrey Osmond, Allen Ginsberg, and so many others who guided psychedelic research and exploration. After spending several years as a digital marketing expert for some of the world's largest brands, Zach had a wake-up call 13 years ago, which thrust him back to the center of into the psychedelic cyclone. And thanks to the influence of his primary teacher and mentor, Ram Dass, Zach has found his own unique voice and method in being able to contribute to the revolutionary new psychedelic movement of the 21st century. As a health and wellness facilitator, an integration coach, a session guide, podcaster, writer, and seeker of all things mystical, Zach has worked with nearly 200 people one-on-one to help them heal with the assistance of psychedelic medicines. And as a teacher, Zach has taught over 100 people his unique approach to psychedelic studies, about safe use and harm reduction, about the history of psychedelics and how to be well-rounded, knowledgeable, and a safe practitioner. Zach currently hosts the Psychedelics Then and Now podcast. You can find it everywhere, some great interviews. And he has in-depth knowledge of psychedelic-assisted facilitation. He's a trained meditation teacher, a student of Bhakti Yoga, and an expert in the history of psychedelic culture and its many methodologies. Zach is also an avid musician, a kirtan singer, and a lifelong practicing deadhead. As an author, Zach is here to share his first book, Your Extraordinary Mind. And following today's presentation, He will be here for a book signing, so please stop by, say hello to Zach, buy a book or two, and I'd like to welcome my friend, our teacher, a mystic, Zach Leary.
We're just going to do a little, there we go, just a little shift in digital scenery there. Hi everyone, how's it going? Good to see you all. All right. So typically when I do these things, you just kind of see where it goes, you know? Yeah, I'm glad, I put the deadhead thing in there. Well, one, because it's true. I'm still a practicing deadhead. But I do put it in there because, the center of the Grateful Dead ethos is improvisation, and such as it is with talking and giving talks as well. We just kind of see where the energy flows and take it from there. In the spring of 1996, Ram Dass was visiting Timothy, my father, for the last time in his body. And it was a very interesting afternoon, to say the least. So the way our house was structured was every kind of room in the house, including the bedrooms, had these sliding glass doors that went out onto the lawn and overlooked the city. And Ram Dass came over and was visiting Tim in his bedroom. And right outside of Tim's bedroom, the sliding glass door was a flotation tank that John Lilly gifted to us. And I took Ram Dass in to go visit with Tim, and they just had, let them be and just kind of, I think Ram Dass knew it was going to be the last time we was going to see him in his body. And I says, okay, cool, just let them hang out. I'm going to go in the flotation tank and while they're visiting and just kind of, have a little bit of a exploration in there. I decided to do a little bit of ketamine before I went in. And I'm in there. And while I'm in there, I don't think Tim and Ram Dass, in fact, I know they didn't know that I was inside the flotation tank. So their visit ended up moving from the bedroom to pulling up a couple chairs, one of them being Timothy's wheelchair, right next to the flotation tank and the tank's hatch. And so I'm inside of the tank, and I kind of got into a little bit of a, I don't know, what should we call it? A little bit of a K-hole, but a little bit of a discombobulation where I lost my bearings and wasn't really sure what was happening at all. And the only message that came to me was, okay, open the hatch and get out. I need some light. I think I've had enough. I need to kind of ground myself a little bit. So I kind of in a panic, this sweaty panic with all kind of the salty kind of goodness of the flotation tank all over my body, I popped open the hatch. And sitting this is the hatch, and sitting right there is Timothy and Ram Dass. And we're all just staring at each other. They didn't know I was there. I didn't know that they were there. And it was just like this, 10-second kind of silent stare, but felt like hours, And about 15 seconds later, Ram Dass leans into me and gets about a foot away from me, looks at me and dead in the eyes with that beautiful gaze of his and says, "Who are you now?" And, I want to add to that, even with the way I grew up, it was not lost on me, being on psychedelics and being around those guys, that was not, I did not take that for granted. I knew it was very special. I knew that I was very safe, that these were probably the two best guys in the world to be around on if you were having kind of an iffy psychedelic experience. But that was one of those moments that I hope everybody has in life that just really sets the course of your life in a different direction. It's a lightning bolt of change. It's a lightning bolt of possibility. It's a lightning bolt of self-inquiry that really changes the fabric of your existence. At that time, though, I was only 22 years old, and I was really finding my way. I didn't know who I was now. didn't know who I was going to be, you know. People love to ask what it was like growing up with Timothy Leary, and of course it's a obvious question to ask, and that's fine, and I don't really have any problems answering it. And of course, it was an amazing thing to grow up with so many of these luminaries and some of the great thinkers of the 20th century, and getting to meet so many of my heroes in music and the arts and movies and film and painting, and all of that was great. Of course it was. But the downside, the kind of in the cons column, is a lot of the cliches that you do hear around children who grow up with very successful families or famous families, is that often the children get left with this sense of not knowing who they are, not knowing their place in the world, not knowing what it is I was good at, not knowing what my voice was all about. Because everything kind of came with the Timothy Leary experience. It was kind of a package deal, any sort of odd jobs that I had, girlfriends, a social scene, it was all just kind of baked into it. So as Timothy was nearing the end of his life and eventually left his body in late May of 1996, he really prepared us for the death and dying process in a really beautiful way. So that wasn't really hard. But what was very difficult around it was that I was left without this sun that I was orbiting around. And I was left just this little moon floundering in space, wondering, shit, what the hell should I do, with my life? I don't know how to live life on life's terms. And so that who are you now kind of thing, that moment, and this was a great moment I really like to revisit with Ram Dass over the years. We had this conversation probably a dozen times over the next 25 years, always reminding him of that moment. And at one point he kind of said to me that part of the reason he did say that to me was to kind of lovingly call me out on my insecurity. Because he knew that I didn't know, but he knew that I knew that I didn't know. And Ram Dass was a master at that. He was a master at being able to look into your eyes and look into your heart and really know what it is that you need in that moment. And even at 22 years old, he was able to kind of just shift me in that direction of like, hey, find out who you are. Find out what you're here to do, what your incarnation is all about. And certainly at that moment, I did not realize that. It took a really, really long time to find out. So as it relates to where I am now, the reason I kind of tell this story and kind of associate it with this slide a little bit, and thanks ChatGPT for making that funny image of me. Yeah, it's kind of accurate a little bit. I don't know. Is that after much trial and error and kind of ebbs and flows with the idea, I do consider myself to be a legacy holder. Oftentimes kind of the idea of a legacy holder is, we kind of contain it to indigenous work and things like that and carrying on very specific traditions. But in the last few years especially, I've really settled with the idea that kind of keeping the kind of original seed of psychedelic exploration in the West alive and that conversation kind of pulsating throughout this modern psychedelic movement that we find ourselves in, I find it to be extremely, extremely important. We have seen the fabric of psychedelic healing change so much over the last few decades. When I was growing up, even up until that point in that Ram Dass moment, I had so many amazing psychedelic experiences. And I really do think that, psychedelics in my formative years, and really feel it deeply, really did help me to see the world and the fabric of reality and kind of the multi-matrix dimensionality of consciousness in a very unique way, even as a young person. And those were really wonderful waves to surf, It really kind of set the stage for my eventual adoption of Eastern spirituality and practices and kind of those mystical traditions, and my view of kind of spirituality and what God is and what reality is, and or what reality isn't, and how to kind of create this objective reality both within myself and with others as well. But when you use psychedelics so frequently at a young age, it's a very different experience as opposed to using them later in life. I really didn't have that much life experience underneath my belt, so most of my psychedelic experiences then were very externally focused. They were very much outside of myself, looking for meaning and looking for sound and music and the miracle of kind of the human experience and kind of the conundrum of the human predicament, but didn't really take me into my own identity and healing my wounds, so to speak. When Timothy died, I was really just kind of left very, very lost. And initially, the solution to that was substance abuse. And, most people who find themselves in the midst of substance abuse in whatever form that takes, it does look like a solution at first. It kind of has the shape and the color and the feel of a solution at first. The self-destructive qualities of it really don't make themselves known until a little bit later, because the drugs work. They do take you out of your immediate need to address your pain and to address your traumas and just kind of keep you in this state of emotional purgatory. And they were very successful for me at doing that, at keeping me in this place of neutrality, of numbness. And, I did not have a death wish. I didn't want to die, but I also didn't want to live. I just kind of was in this place of just kind of this torrid, neutral existence, And, that shtick, that relationship with that kind of ritualistic approach to escaping your own humanity wears thin very quickly, You can't keep that up for very long, It will bite you in the ass pretty quickly. And sure enough, it did. I was a very low bottom addict. But, when I originally got clean and in recovery in 1998, that's when I first got in recovery. I have relapsed more than once. But when I first got clean in recovery, I just was so grateful to be past the drugs and to kind of find this community of people in the 12-step community to kind of show me how to kind of live life on life's terms. And kind of what came with that, though, was, back to sort of the seeds of the who are you now thing. And at that point in my life, I thought the best thing to do would be to get as far away from the psychedelic community as possible, growing up in it and around it, especially as, it wasn't that long since Timothy died, the memory of him was still so potent and palpable in people's consciousness. So anytime I was around the psychedelic community, it was always kind of the son of, or what do you have to say, and being kind of in that comparative model of psychedelics. So I tried really hard to get away from it. And I ended up working in digital marketing and advertising for about 13 years, and at a pretty high level, rose up in the ranks in a very, kind of checking off all the boxes of Western success and promotions and pretty big paychecks and status and things like that. And my story is no different than so many that you've heard, in kind of getting disillusioned with the Western model of what fulfillment is, and what satisfaction is, and what purpose is, and what dharma is. And, about 12 years into this 13-year career, or just a little bit before that, actually, I started reintroducing meditation and yoga and revisiting the works of Ram Dass and Alan Watts and Jack Kornfield into my life. And things were just starting to feel a little unsettled in my stomach. I was going to the office every day and just sort of feeling kind of like an empty suit, and that something just wasn't right, you know. And I grabbed a friend, my friend Dean Chamberlain, this amazing light painter who, if you don't know his work, you should. I grabbed him and I said, you know what, let's go visit Ram Dass. We haven't seen him since he moved to the mainland, since he moved away from the mainland and moved to Maui. And it had been about 4.5 years. And this was November of 2008. And I went to go visit Ram Dass. And, you know, I'd spent so much time with Ram Dass in my formative years, and he welcomed me with open arms. But there was something about that trip, that visit to seeing Ram Dass and being in his home in Maui, and there was just this different energetic field to that visit that really changed my life completely. Got there on a Thursday evening, said hi, had dinner, it was great. I just felt so much peace and so much love, and sort of like this deep knowing that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The next morning I got up. I got up a little earlier than everyone else because I had the time change from the mainland. And I was sitting in Ram Dass's living room, which is kind of like a giant puja room, kind of by myself, watching the sun come up over the ocean. And I had this just tremendous download, almost like this. It was a vision of sorts during a meditation. And this is substance-free, mind you. And the vision was, it was kind of a projection of my life at age 80 years old, wondering where my life had gone. And if I stayed on this trajectory, I was going to wake up at age 80 wondering where my life had gone, and that I didn't get to do the things that I wanted to do, and the things that really brought me fulfillment and made my heart sing and brought purpose into my life. And, you know, that was my experience, you know. And so that trip just kind of culminated with Ram Dass appearing as my teacher for the first time. You know, I was always deeply influenced from him. I read Be Here Now in the back of a Volkswagen bus, following the Grateful Dead around at age 16, like straight out of Almost Famous or something. You know, it was a total cliche, and it was great. I always loved RD, and always really loved my father's works as well. And, you know, all of that kind of remained true, but I never really embodied it, you know. And that trip changed, you know. I didn't leave Maui after, you know, those 5 days and just immediately quit my job or anything like that and just said, you know, fuck it, I'm going to tune in, turn on, and drop out. But you know, it did start the process of that. And within that next year, I quit my job, and but more importantly, about 2 weeks later, when I got back to Los Angeles, I revisited the mushroom for the first time in 9 years. And let me tell you two things. One, when you have such a long break with psychedelics, and two, when you use psychedelics again in an intentional way when you're older and you have gone through life's challenges, through life's kind of testing of, you know, the human experience, it's almost like doing them again for the first time. You know, certainly I was very comfortable with the fireworks and the visuals and remembering, oh, I'd been here before. Okay, this is cool. I remember this. But how it shined a light on my purpose, my dharma, the horrors of my addiction, my sense of disconnection from a spiritual path, and kind of shining a light on connection, and the whole idea around separation, all these things. It was just extraordinary. And something about that trip, you know, was really one of those amazing experiences where, again, you know, the path just looks a little bit different from that point forward. So, you know, it's not like I just, you know, had this mushroom experience and one day woke up and started becoming a psychedelic facilitator or anything like that. But I did land in this place of starting to feel really passionate about the transformational effects of psychedelics on an interpersonal level. not just an extra personal level as it relates to kind of seeing the cosmos and consciousness in a different way, but how it actually can heal your heart, your soul, your spirit, kind of chip away at those traumatic kind of karmic residues that get stuck in your body and change the course of your life. And it just so happened around the same time, and this was a complete coincidence, that the psychedelic movement in America was going through this entire renaissance again. So, you know, over the course of the next few years, I started hosting podcasts and ended up hosting the MAPS podcast and really plugging myself back into this community in a formal way. And, you know, it really, for me, in my kind of relationship with the community and relationship with psychedelics as a whole, it really seemed kind of equated to the best way for me to serve, you know. I think ultimately, you know, in any capacity that we find ourselves spending time in this world, you know, service is such a beautiful way to do that, right? And that can come in so many forms, you know. You know, service and seva in the traditional kind of definition of the Eastern version of the word seva means to serve without reward or without recognition and things like that. But here in the West, you know, we live in the material world and we kind of have to make friends with all the things that come with that. So I did find that as I kind of moved into helping so many people discover the magical, transformational potentiality of psychedelic medicines, really became a sweet spot for me to be able to serve in. And a lot of the reason I'm kind of telling you guys these stories is really because this is how my book, Your Extraordinary Mind, Psychedelics in the 21st Century and How to Use Them, came about. You know, the inspiration for the book and how the book kind of came to manifest in its current form. You know, as one thing that, you know, another kind of pivotal kind of shift for me was I started working with others in the psychedelic field as a facilitator. Really through no kind of direct action of my own, to be honest. I have to kind of call it like it is. I had a lot of therapist friends in Los Angeles where I was living at the time who were really the ones who ushered me into it, as kind of a lot of this modern research was coming out in the psychedelic sphere, and, you know, underground therapists were still kind of hard to come by. It wasn't as, you know, it was still a burgeoning movement. I kind of got sucked into it thanks to some therapist friends who were really like, Zach, this is what you need to be doing. So I started working with others, and after, you know, some years of doing this, I started to realize that I had this incredible amount of data. You know, I mean, several years into it, about 7 or 8 years into it, I started to realize that I had so much data, you know, and that data combined with my experience of being, you know, a legacy holder, combined with my experience of having a lot of opinions on the current psychedelic movement and the attitudes, the cultural shifts and attitudes around psychedelics changing, and all of these things combined, I thought would make for a very interesting book, you know. And, you know, from a macro level, even outside of my own experience, you know, I do think that people who are doing facilitation work in whatever capacity, if that is in legal clinical trials, if that is in indigenous circles, psychedelic churches, legal retreats in Mexico, Jamaica, or otherwise, or underground facilitators in various places around the world, I think are really such amazing kind of stewards of how psychedelics are working, kind of like the boots on the ground model, how these things are really impacting people's lives on a daily basis, you know. And I mention that because when you juxtapose it against kind of clinical trial research, it's very different. a lot of, the clinical trials, like especially the MAPS, Lycos, PTSD, MDMA trials with especially the veterans population, or what else? The end-of-life anxiety trials at NYU, or the treatment-resistant depression trials at Johns Hopkins with Roland Griffiths and psilocybin. Those have given us such amazing insights to the clinically oriented healing potential of psychedelics, and has given us this amazing amount of data. But I think so many of our, the people who are facilitating and doing these things on a daily basis, I kind of think of the kind of facilitation community and the medicine workers of the world, in whatever form they take, are really kind of just these sprinklers of light, of just sprinkling light and change out into the world, and the residual kind of karmic effect of like bringing someone to the medicine, seeing their lives change, and how that person goes back into their community or their family or their relationships and acts as a better husband, father, girlfriend, boyfriend, employee, boss, doctor, lawyer, whatever it is an extraordinary thing, right? I mean, I think that's such an incredible testament to the psychedelic experience as we see it used in an intentional setting today, right? And, I get asked a lot, and this is kind of an important thing to talk about, is, what's the difference between the 60s kind of psychedelic revolution and the psychedelic movement today? And while I'm not that old, I wasn't old enough to have been using LSD in the 60s, but I'm pretty aware of a lot of the research and the players of the movement. I think a lot of the differences lie in intentionality, lie in the research doing a really amazing job at changing the cultural conversation around the use of psychedelics, and in integration. A really funny thing happened to me when I was writing the book. I was doing a lot of research and kind of going back to some of the great 60s, iconic books on psychedelics, Psychedelic Experience, LSD by Stanley Krippner and Richard Albert, and some of Stan Groff's work, and even looking at some of the Humphrey Osmond papers in the 1950s. And one thing that is consistently absent from all of these books? Integration. There's almost no mention of it at all, at least not in the formal way that we talk about it today, as looking at the psychedelic experience as a three-tiered process: preparation, the journey, integration, right? And I think no matter your style of integration or how you, or what population you work with or anything, I think that's kind of become a commonality, right, amongst psychedelic use today, is really honoring the three-tiered process. And I found it so mysterious that integration is conspicuously absent from the 60s and even 1950s model of using psychedelics. Unfortunately, none of these guys are around to ask anymore. So I kind of channeled a little bit of poetic license on why that might have been, and just sort of made up my own story about why that is. I think, a lot of us probably in this room already know this, but the original kind of introduction to psychedelics in the American culture was through psychotherapy. If we look at the Humphrey Osmond model of LSD as a psychotherapeutic agent in the 1950s, Cary Grant is a very famous example, Bill Wilson with his famous LSD trips as it relates to alcohol. And that was really a response to, the limitations and the dryness and the very linear, as Maggie and I were talking about yesterday, the very linear approach of psychotherapy of that time. Therapy, of course, today has changed a lot, but back then, and then, as psychedelics, as the culture started to change in America around the death of JFK, the Beatles invading America, and all these kind of the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, and all of these cultural touchstones psychedelics kind of got infused into that and exploded so rapidly that it was impossible to put the genie back in the bottle, right? And I think because of that, a lot of the methodology of how to use psychedelics in kind of a ceremonial or intentional way kind of got lost. At this point, though, well, I should back up by saying, there are a lot of people, and, I've been, kind of on the receiving end of this argument for a lot of years, sort of by default, just because of my last name. But, your father ruined legitimate psychedelic research for everyone else to come afterwards. He was out there trumpeting indiscriminate use and all of this, and it leaked from the laboratory and really ruined it for all the legitimate scientists around the world and all this kind of nonsense. And I don't think any of that is true. But nonetheless, I understand why people do say that. But I do think that looking back on it, 50, 60 years later, I think the cultural significance and the cultural influence that psychedelics had in the 1960s was worth it. It was worth kind of yeah. I mean, look, we wouldn't be standing here today, all the kind of things that we kind of take for granted. Psychedelics had a huge role to play in the kind of dissemination of these ideas in American culture, whether that is the sexual revolution, civil rights, LGBTQ rights, the climate change movement, rock and roll, music, pop culture, art, film, literature, all of these things, all kind of had seeds in the psychedelic change that happened really, really fast. But nonetheless, I did find it kind of strange how integration wasn't really as much of a concept back then. So I really kind of started to think about that and kind of put it in the column of what we can do better today in not repeating the same mistakes of the 1960s. And there are many things that I think today's movement gets right, and that is certainly one of them, is integration. And not only integration, but as I said before, I think the changing culture and attitudes around psychedelic use has kind of created a safety mechanism that gives people safety and permission and community to come out of the closet and talk about their psychedelic experiences in a different way. Psychedelics are no longer a property of the counterculture. It's no longer a fringe thing that you do at Grateful Dead concerts or Fish concerts or Burning Man or whatever, wherever else, I mean, so many people from very establishment walks of life, whether that is doctors, lawyers, politicians, business leaders, and so forth, have attributed psychedelics to their growth. And obviously the mental health implications that we're seeing so much of today. But the changing in attitudes and the changing in kind of the tides of the psychedelic conversation has really made integration become, a cornerstone of the community dialogue around psychedelic use today, right? And so when I was writing my book, I was going through a lot of my notes with talking about integration and kind of a lot of my notes around a lot of the client work that I've done. And also kind of thinking about, how psychedelics were used in the 60s, even how I used them as a teenager and things like that. And I was getting kind of hung up on the idea of chasing peak experience, and kind of the need of some people to kind of want to chase peak experience and not to kind of stop, reflect, integrate, turn insight into action, and to take these transformations and turn them into kind of a pragmatic application of how to make your life better on a regular basis. Chasing peak experience is something I think every psychonaut will fall into that trap of at one time or another, and it's not entirely a bad thing. Going back into the center of the cyclone can be a very powerful way to continue on these themes of expansion and transformation and kind of seeing how your own experience as a human being is changing and evolving. And the who are you now thing, right? And that can be, for me, that's become a very popular mantra inside my own kind of psychedelic consciousness every time I use psychedelics, right? Is who am I now? And kind of these incremental little upgrades at making my experience in my body at this moment in time perhaps better. I hope I'm learning. I hope I'm growing. I hope I'm not I hope I'm not stagnant. But chasing peak experience too can also be kind of a trap, right? As Ram Dass liked to say all the time, in order to get the true value and effectiveness of any method, you must be unattached to the method. The second you become attached to the method is when the method no longer serves you, right? And I'm going to chant the Hanuman Chalisa 108 times today because I'm going to do it. I'm going to meditate like the Buddha and just, so attached to the results. Or, I'm going to do my 12th Bufo experience this month, man, because I know I'm going to find the answers on the other side, And, as we know, and if you fall into those traps I have many times, none of those answers are true, It's all about sincerity, It's all about kind of the extraction of as much nectar as you can muster and squeeze out of every bit of your spiritual practice. And that includes psychedelic use, right? So as I was writing my book and writing the integration chapter, I was kind of just, riffing on these ideas of like how to make each experience long lasting and how to combat the need to chase peak experience, and how to offer kind of a modality for psychedelic users who are newer to the path that can be kind of very pragmatic, actually. Also very spiritual and mystical. But to me, kind of, there's a great kind of 12-step-ism that I heard many, many years ago. Spirituality is nothing if it's not practical. And I kind of always really related with that, If we stay kind of too far off with our heads in the clouds, and can't really bring our spiritual connection back to the material world, then maybe we might fall out of balance just a little bit. I don't know. It's worth thinking about, though. So I was kind of just riffing on all of this with my partner back home in Austin one day, and all of these ideas, and I was like setting, and she was like, sustainability. Set, setting, and sustainability. It's the third S. And I was like, oh, wow, fuck, you're right. That's amazing. Holy shit. Why didn't I think of that? So, yeah, together we kind of, riffed and kind of put together this new model of what I like to think of as psychedelic efficacy. Set, setting, and sustainability, right? And sustainability is... obviously, you know what the word means, and I've kind of already explained that kind of idea of extracting as much change, nectar, knowledge, transformation out of each psychedelic experience, and that can be done through a whole buffet of modalities that might be different for every single one of you, There was Jack Kornfield who said, psychedelic integration is a very fickle thing. God forbid it should ever be standardized. And I really, really, really appreciate that, and really try to live by that. And I teach that too, and when I work with others, and in my psychedelic studies intensive, I have a lot of pet peeves in this community. I'm trying to kind of stay away from that and just kind of stay in the light, and not kind of riff on some of the pet peeves. But one of the pet peeves that I have is psychedelic integration training programs that create these modalities that are kind of a one-size-fits-all thing for every single person. That is, I do believe psychedelic integration can be taught, and a lot of the subtleties, both energetic, somatic, spiritual, intellectual, and otherwise, can be sort of taught. But I do believe that integration looks different for every single one of you, and that it would for me, and it could include meditation, journaling, communing with nature, breath work, tantra, whatever it is, float tanks, IFS, EMDR. It's just literally an endless list of things. But within that, I do think that there are some commonalities. And in the spirit of the title of the book, oh, well, let's just go all the way to the end, of psychedelics in the 21st century and how to use them. The how to use them part is somewhat important. I do think that there are some commonalities around the how to use them part. Number one, and this is a great example of where science and research has helped to inform the mystical experience, right? There aren't too many examples of that, but this is a great one. We have always kind of known, I think, intuitively, deep down inside, especially with, well, I shouldn't say especially, but with plant medicines on a scientific level, that there is kind of this degree of malleability and expansion that stays intact even after the journey, right? There's this kind of enhancement of where things just, you become like a sponge after the journey, and you can really kind of be the change that the mushroom is kind of pointing you towards even after the journey has ended, right? In science today, we refer to it as loosely as the default mode network or the critical period, if you look at some of the work that Dr. Gould-Dolan is doing at Berkeley. But it all kind of supports this idea, right? And the idea being, as we age, our waking state of consciousness limits our ability to graft onto new ideas and to change, right? I mean, you hear it in pop culture all the time, in TV and film, and people don't change. They really don't, But we do, and we can change, and it is possible, And the elasticity that occurs after a psychedelic experience, science has shown us that it's, depending on what compound we're talking about, it's anywhere from 48 hours to 5 days. There is kind of this enhanced kind of sponge-like receptivity to the possibility of doing something different, if you look at it as on an interpersonal level or behavioral level, this could be, relationships with, just some basic examples, substance abuse, right? Curbing some behaviors around that, exercising better, eating better, learning to communicate with your partner better, in a way that is more harmonious and in alignment with the person that you want to become. There are a million examples of that, right? And psychedelic integration, in the simplest terms, is about turning insight into action, right? Turning these insights and turning them into a tangible action that you can apply in your daily life, right? So under this, back to the integration thing, I do think there are some commonalities around that, especially in the sweet spot that occurs after the journey. On the most extreme level, just to kind of make the point, the worst thing that you could do is do a heroic dose of mushrooms on a Sunday and go back to your desk at an office on a Monday, right? I mean, obviously, right? But seriously, that's kind of the worst possible way to use the psychedelics effectively, right? So, if we allow time to, we gift ourselves this time with these experiences to really kind of drop into what it is we saw, we encountered, perhaps we confronted, perhaps we embraced. Timothy once said that LSD is a confrontational drug. It's not an escapist drug. Sometimes that's true. I don't always agree with that. But, a lot of us can have very confrontational experiences with psychedelics where they show us parts of our humanity that we're just not wanting to see in that moment. But nonetheless, even seeing those darkest, shadowy, kind of squishier sides of our humanity, it's really a beautiful thing to experience. And if we make friends with all parts of our humanity and our shadow and otherwise, I think that's where real change starts to happen, And not just in our humanity as well. It's also, as we see so much, and if you kind of hear the stories, the personal recollections of deep trauma work with with MDMA and other substances around healing trauma. It's not just about the deep shadow sides of ourselves, but also the deep shadow kind of scary recollections of the origins behind these trauma stories, and feeling safe enough to re-explore them and reprocess them under kind of the loving guide, the loving arms of these medicines. And that can be a very, very profound and beautiful transformation to go through, right? The hardest change that I find, not just in my own experiences, but working with others too, it's addressing the things that we have the hardest time talking about, right? And again, back to kind of what we, just to kind of close the loop on the integration thing, I think that is why psychedelic societies like here, what you guys have created here in Palm Springs, and the Global Psychedelic Society can illuminate you to all the amazing psychedelic societies in almost every major city around the world. I mean, of course, there are countries in the Middle East and Africa that still don't have the kind of safety to gather and talk about these things yet. But there is so much happening that is allowing people to kind of gather in community and talk about these changes and talk about these experiences and how we plot the future for psychedelic expansion, And that is, I think that is a potentially tricky thing to really talk about. It's also a really beautiful opportunity. Of course it is. But I mean that it's kind of a tricky thing to talk about is because the future of psychedelics is really up to us, right? It's not up to the politicians. It's not up to policy change. I mean, those things are all fine and they're helpful, but it's really up to us and how we embody psychedelics and become testaments to their effectiveness out in the world, I don't believe that we're looking to government powers that be to give us permission to change our consciousness as we see fit. That's up to us. That's an interpersonal decision that only you can make, right? And there's a cognitive libertarian inside each and every one of us that has a strong desire to change its consciousness as you see fit, right? And I encourage you to do so, decrim movements and legalization movements and, the adoption of legalization of MDMA for the treatment of PTSD. These are all really good things in that they change the cultural conversation and help to undo the 60 years of disinformation around psychedelics. But they are not reasons in and of themselves to allow each and every one of you to move forward with these medicines or not. That might be a kind of a heated topic for some of you, but for me, it really isn't, And, there's this kind of underlying other kind of secondary question around some of those examples that I just named too. Can psychedelics coexist with capitalism? Terence McKenna would say no. He certainly would say no. He said the whole idea of psychedelics is to wake you up from the horror show of corporate culture, and that the people programming your televisions and programming your lust for product greed are really the enemy. And once you discover kind of the sovereignty, the individual and spiritual sovereignty found within the mushroom, then you're set free. Perhaps he was right. But nonetheless, it's a train that is going down the tracks and it's not going to be stopped, right? Some potential kind of maybe yellow moving towards orange, red flags that I do want to talk about that are the medicalization model of psychedelics, right? I mean, I already kind of touched on that in that, yes, I know the medicalization model, especially as it relates to mental health, has been a very effective kind of arbiter in the rethinking of how we treat mental health in this country. And the success rates have been extraordinary. Of course they have been. It's been amazing, right? But what comes with that is the perception of psychedelics to people who are new to psychedelics that it is under the guidance of mental health professionals and mental health professionals only, and that these things should only be done in clinically, medically supervised settings, so on and so forth, right? And that, of course, for any good psychonaut knows, that is not true, right? And why is that not true, though, right? What's the downside of that, right? What's wrong with having a psychedelic session medically supervised? Well, nothing really inherently, I suppose. But what does seem to happen is when we kind of standardize the psychedelic experience and turn it into kind of a procedural approach, is that the magic, mysticism, and ritualistic phenomena around the psychedelic experience get stripped away, right? This is most exemplified in ketamine clinics. Not all ketamine clinics are created equal, right? There are some ketamine clinics that are fantastic ketamine clinics that have great ketamine-assisted therapists and really are there to help you and understand that, a mystical transformation is happening. And there are other ketamine clinics that just kind of put you in a room, give you a shot, and hey, let us know how it went. Just kind of that, But if we kind of expand that and take that into the entheogenic world as well, I see that as very, very problematic as well. So, rolling out the future of psychedelics to a larger population, I think the answer to it is really kind of creating seats at the table for everyone, and for no single member of that table to have kind of a superiority complex of this is the only way to do it. Your way isn't, this way is the only way, and we start getting into a battle of the egos, That includes indigenous elders, medicalized professionals, ketamine clinics, psilocybin healing centers in Colorado, psychedelic churches all around the country, underground facilitators, trauma therapists, and everyone under the sun who really is using these medicines as a way to help us heal and help us get in touch with our humanity and help bring us closer to God in whatever form that looks like, right? And to me, that really feels like kind of the right equation of how we are going to bring these amazing compounds out to a larger audience, It is a tricky thing. I find myself contradicting myself all the time. On one hand, I'm like, I'm a cognitive libertarian. You don't need permission to change your consciousness. Yeah, cool, But then on the other hand, I'm like, yeah, I'm not so sure I should be able to walk into the head shop and buy a vial of LSD, I don't know, maybe, but I'm not so sure that anyone over 21 should be able to walk in and buy 1,000 hits of acid. I don't know. So I really don't have the answers, but I do think that keeping the kind of the conversation going is really is the best way forward. You know what I mean? So yeah, a lot of these themes are really really what it is that informed my book. And I wanted to encapsulate, like I said at the beginning, data. So many stories of the people I've worked with, and really feeling that working with hundreds of people at this point, that I had this incredible amount of perspective to share with the world. Second, obviously being a legacy holder is something I'm very proud of. But rather than, just writing Timothy Leary and Ram Dass stories, kind of just what happened kind of thing, which is something I didn't really do in the book. I thought through a lot of deep inner work and meditation that they would want me to represent and reflect their influence on me through my own voice and opinions, not just by telling stories of what it was like to be with them. So that was kind of the other part of it. And the rest of it is just commentary on this amazing inflection point of time that we find ourselves in. And it is an extraordinary inflection point in time. We often refer to this as the psychedelic renaissance, but I would challenge the nomenclature of that just a little bit, because the word renaissance implies that it's a revival of something. I don't think the West has ever seen psychedelics accepted and adopted as a modality for healing in a all circles. I don't think that's ever been true, right? It's always kind of been on the fringes, outlying, and we're kind of seeing a little shift in that today. And that really sums up my primary mission in this movement. Over the course of time, I find myself becoming a little bit less of a psychedelic zealot, much less than I have been. I certainly have my opinions that they might be a more successful solution than others, but I really just want to see psychedelics being accepted and adopted in the same way as we do therapy, meditation, yoga, float tanks, breath work, herbology, diet changes, exercise, any sort of modality under the sun. I see psychedelics as just being another equation within that whole melting pot of what's possible and how the potentiality of transformation is a really achievable thing. And that is my mission, that is my hope, and I do think that through the power and change and representation of all of you guys being such amazing psychedelic stewards, that is possible. So, yeah, let's talk. Let's do some questions. So this here is a microphone that Dr. Bill has. However you guys want to do it, just raise your hand and yeah. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Zach. Excellent. My question for you, I've been thinking, even before I came, the question that I would have. And let's say you could do a little bit of time traveling, which you may have already done.
Every chance I get. Yeah.
So let's say you could go back and see Tim Leary, and it's his first trip with Sandoz. And he's received it.
First trip was actually Cuernavaca mushrooms.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
The first entheogenic trip that
Yep.
he's had, and he's like, oh my God, this is a game changer. You've time traveled, you can go back, you can give him a message. What would you say?
Well, that's a good question. Well, my answer for that would be a little bit biased because I knew him so well. The first thing that, his most famous quote after that first experience in Cuernavaca was, I learned more about myself in these 4 hours than I have in the previous 20 years of doing psychotherapy. And that's a great quote. It's certainly very potent, for sure, right? I guess what I would just tell him would be, hey, look, Timmy, like, this is going to get really popular really, really, really fast. And to an extent that you aren't prepared for. And get prepared for it and take it really slow. Take it really slow. So much of the Timothy Leary story is wrapped up, I think, in we don't understand what it was like to go from 0 to 100 so quickly. It was not his intention. He didn't mean to kind of be that person. So he certainly embraced it and enjoyed it and went on the ride, but it went so far, so quickly. I think I would tell him, like, slow down, pump the brakes a little bit.
Just real quick, Zach, you brought up the term of integration, and I'm not so sure that a lot of people know what that means. So could you shed some meaning on that for the audience?
Yeah, well, as I said, integration, we look at the psychedelic experience when we're talking about intentionality of the psychedelic experience. And I do also want to, I kind of jumped around a lot today. I want to point out that intentionality around the psychedelic experience can come in many forms. It doesn't always have to mean that, we're at a psychedelic retreat or we have a facilitator, it's still very possible to gather in community with a loved one or a friend and use psychedelics in an intentional way. But however it is that you're using them, looking at the psychedelic experience as preparation, prepping your mind, body, soul, and spirit for what's to come, the journey itself, and integration is processing the experience afterwards, turning the insights into action in the simplest form. And that's what integration is. It's taking the transformation that occurred during those 15 minutes with DMT to 12 hours with ayahuasca and LSD and turning it into something that you can take with you on your daily life for years to come.
Hi. I would like to ask you, you spoke about the renaissance of the psychedelic experience, but I think that we can be a little more blunt and call it what it is. Decolonization of psychedelics. Do you think that, would you agree with that?
The decolonization of psychedelics? Well, what do you mean by that?
Like through colonization and the expansion of the West and the Americas, there were a lot of laws that have been created through centuries that prohibit the use of medicines. So what we are doing actually is not going against like the government currently, but the whole system that started since 1492.
Yeah, I love that. No, I would kind of agree with that. And yeah, I would really agree with that. You know, if you look at the, you know, the colonization of European settlers on the Americas is maybe that microphone can just be brought up. Maybe it's out of range. I don't know. The colonization of European settlers in the Americas plays a pivotal part in wiping out psychedelic use throughout the Americas at an indigenous level. There are some, I'm totally forgetting his name right now, but there was a Spanish colonialist priest who observed what was happening in Teotihuacan and around the Aztec culture and wrote about it in his journals and how they saw it, how Spanish settlers saw what they were doing with mushrooms as demonic, as they were seeing it as anti-Christian, as anti-Catholic, and this was evil and this was sin, and that they were communing with the devil and all of these things. And they systematically wiped out, you know, mushroom culture. Not 100%. Fortunately, it did find little nooks and crannies to survive, but pretty close to it, you know. And colonialization is a huge reason why psychedelics did not kind of make it from indigenous use into even Christian mysticism and progressive ideas in the West. I mean, there are, you know, plenty of great early Western mystics guys like Emerson and William James and Thoreau, who probably all would have loved psychedelics, but they were nowhere to be found, you know. And so, yes, I do think that's a very good lens to look at it through, and I appreciate that.
Hi. My question is, in the AA sobriety recovery community,
Yeah.
that a lot of people look down on this as a relapse. And what would you say to those people that view that as such?
I would say so many things. Such a good question. I have a whole chapter in my book about it. And I will say I still consider myself a member of the 12-step community. Narcotics Anonymous saved my life, 100% saved my life. I was a very low bottom addict, jails, institutions, homelessness. And I have a tremendous amount of love and respect for the 12-step community. I just want to say that first, even though I challenge them a great deal. But I have a great amount of love for them. Number one, Bill Wilson did LSD 6 times. End of conversation. I mean, what more is there to say about it? The founder of Alcoholics Anonymous did LSD 6 times and thought it was the great cure for alcoholism, called it the great ego sublimator. And the only reason he stopped is because his wife kind of pulled him off of the edge and was like, Bill, this might get a little muddy with the fellowship. But he died having a great love affair with LSD. But moving into the modern age, I find steps 3 and 11, I find the psychedelic experience to be the embodiments of the 3rd and 11th steps, you know? Oh, 3rd step is we turned our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood him, her, it to be. 11th step, we saw through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understand it. Praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. That's the 11th step. And I think psychedelics are a beautiful embodiment of the 11th step. Praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. You know, so how can a fellowship that, and this is going to sound pretty judgy, but it's true, that, you know, a great portion of the fellowship is on some kind of psychiatric medication, or is on some kind of benzo to help them sleep, or smokes a ton of cigarettes and coffee. How can they say that is okay, but going to see a shaman and having a spiritual experience using a compound is not? To me, it just does not add up, you know, how one is accepted and one is another, you know. That said, I do think, and I do write about this a lot in my book, for people who are in early sobriety, clean time, tread carefully, you know. Tread very carefully. I think it's, if you are a substance abuse addict and are in 12-step, I think it's important to have a little bit of recovery under your belt, and you're not just jumping into kind of an escapist paradigm, and you're using these things as very powerful tools to take a look at your recovery and a lot of the deep, you know, the deep kind of origin stories around how you got there in the first place. So that's a very long-winded answer to it, but I challenge the premise completely, and I think it's nonsense.
Hi. Back in the 60s, maybe the 70s, there were a lot of different types of psychedelics. Window pane, orange sunshine, everything. And a lot of people had difficult experiences with them, and some people had wonderful, some had both. So earlier when you mentioned that possibly these centers that are offering these things may not be the way to go, if you had some bad experiences on these things, these aren't toys, obviously. It's very, and so I felt like there was peer pressure. We were suddenly in the middle looking at people at Woodstock or at the Fillmore, in the middle of a packed audience, suddenly coming on to this stuff, thinking, gee, this is like smoking something, but it wasn't. So I'm looking for a direct suggestion. Okay, shouldn't you evaluate a center somehow like anywhere else, like you would a psychotherapist, and have some guidance instead of just saying, good, let's just take this stuff?
No, absolutely.
So,
no, 100%. And no, I couldn't agree more. And I didn't mean to imply that, you know, all the medicalization movement is all bad. Not at all. There are so many great medicinal practitioners and doctors and therapists who are practicing these things in a clinical environment, and many great healing centers around the world who are doing it in a really beautiful way, whether that's psychedelic tourism in Jamaica or psychedelic churches, which are all around the country, by the way. There's 12 psychedelic churches in Austin alone, where I live. And yeah, it can be incredible. My only implication is that we don't want to change the narrative to making it seem like it's the only way. That's all I'm saying. Where do you start looking into it? Yeah. I mean, my answer to that is, I mean, look, I'm not going to, you know, immediately just, you know, say, well, you know, take 200 mics of acid and go to see fish or anything like that. But, you know, but going to your local psychedelic society, I think, and really connecting with others who have a deep enmity and a deep love and passion and a lot of experiences, a lot of experience around these compounds, and talking to someone about, like, I can't answer it to you just on the stage because I don't know what your intention is. I don't know what you want to get out of it. But if somebody comes to me and asks me privately, I got to know what you're after, what you want to get, where you're trying to heal, where you're trying to grow, you know, and I can maybe point you in the direction after I learn that.
I think he just sort of asked my question. As a child of the 60s, I was deeply involved with psychedelics for probably 20 years, and then walked away. And now I'm in my 70s, and I really have been craving information about myself again and wanting to go back and start it. And I've got jars of mushrooms sitting on the shelf in my house waiting for me. Do you have any kind of one-sentence suggestion as to how we can, and I think you just answered it, go to the Psychedelic Society, because I'm ready. This is burning in my gut
I love it.
to get busy and figure out what I've missed in my life, because I don't want to miss the rest of my life.
There you go. You answered your own question. Love it. Yeah, you answered your own question. Yeah, I mean, if you feel that deep kind of seed of an ember burning inside of you that's really taking you on your own hero's journey, follow it. Absolutely, follow it. You really have nothing to lose. And I think that's true for pretty much everyone, you know. I think psychedelics, I don't believe psychedelics are right for every single person at any given moment. You know, there are some people who may be dealing with some other issues where psychedelics, hey, we need to do some other stuff first to get your container in a place of being receptive and merging with the psychedelic space. But once we get to that place, Godspeed. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, preparation first. I mean, that's the preparation part is depending on the voyager can look very, very different, you know, especially these days with mental health. You know, the preparation part of it can be, you know, anywhere from a week-long thing to a year-long thing, you know, depending on your relationship with psychiatric medications, suicidality, support systems, so many things, so many equations go into it. So many variables go into it, pardon me.
Thank you for bringing your knowledge and wealth of experience and how it's bridging from that integration. So what I heard you say about 3 S's, but the sustainability, to just a little bit more on that for levels. And I had no idea that Palm Springs had a psychedelic society. I'm so excited. Do you want to see more and be involved? You know, just, and yeah, just the wealth of information and bringing back. So I'll let you go from there. Thank you.
Do we have time for more questions, Zach? Where are you feeling? We have some people who have some more questions.
Yeah, we can do a couple more.
All right, I'm going to go back up here again.
Okay. Yeah, just let me just touch on that really quick. Part of the setting sustainability thing was, you know, I don't often do this, but, you know, my 2 primary teachers in life, my dad and Ramdas, came up with set and setting. So I kind of gifted myself a little bit of like poetic license to like add the 3rd S in a way. Maybe it's a little cocky, but it's okay. I'm fine with that, you know. If there's any person around who could have added the 3rd S, I kind of think it's me. So go me.
Yeah, I just wanted to address these recent comments. It is a little bit like the Wild Wild West out there in the land of psychedelics, but not completely. So if people are looking for getting treatment, therapy, etc., there's a local ketamine clinic. There's also references, the website Psychology Today, you can go on it and look for people who have training in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. I would highly suggest you get people who are trained and not, you know, just kind of working your neighbor, not your neighbor or the post office delivery man. Oh. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. Quick questions, and if they're too personal, don't answer them. But
Yeah, fine.
you know, in part of preparation, what I would call pre-journey integration is when you set an intention, can you give an example of an intention you would set? And is there any, as far as immediate integration in the post-ceremony space, is there any integration actions you do right away? That's
Oh, wow.
curious.
That's a big question because it's so subjective.
just an example of an intention.
Sure. I mean, for me, forgiving myself, you know, forgiving myself. I'm very, I'm not free from the bondage of my substance abuse at all, you know. It's very much a work in progress. Brings me a great deal of pain sometimes, but when I go into the psychedelic experience, that's often my first intention, is forgiving myself, you know. Mm. Write or journal, or sometimes I use my voice recorder on my phone. If my eyes are still a little wavy, I'll grab my phone and just hit the button, and just get those thoughts down real fast as possible. Because even the next day, it'll become a little foggy. So just even as you're just coming down and you're in that sweet space, get it down quickly. Yeah. All right. Oh, one more. Okay.
As a hot topic in the future
Mm.
is artificial intelligence. And
Oh, boy.
I was trying to resist it, but I really wanted your opinion of AI. 'Cause I'm someone who resists it in some areas, embraces it in others. And I just wondered if you thought there was any correlation with psychedelics and AI, or is that going to remain separate? And we just wanted your opinion on AI.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion on AI is similar to yours. It's an amazing tool in some areas. In others, it's of course terrifying. ChatGPT helped me write my book. It was my research assistant. You know, literally, it pulled research for me and correlated it into a very digestible way, and that was a very useful tool. I mean, we could talk about AI all day, but as it relates to psychedelics, I am very weary of, like, there's a company out there developing AI psychedelic guides, you know, for instance. No, you know. And I am not anti-technology at all. I'm kind of usually an early adopter, and I do understand the power of technology, but I do believe that, you know, putting our devices down and getting in touch with nature and our own humanity is a very necessary ingredient of psychedelics. So sitting in front of a screen and talking to a artificial entity about what it is we're going through, probably not the best way forward. Yeah. All right, last question.
I always say my inciting incident was taking a huge dose of mushrooms at a Grateful Dead concert at 17.
Awesome.
Having no idea what I was doing
Hey.
and whether it activated something latent or altered my trajectory. I was like, whatever this experience is, I need to know about it. And now I write about consciousness and transformation, human potential, all that stuff. But how old were you when you had your first psychedelic experience? And what did it reveal? Or did it alter your trajectory? Or was it just a good time?
All of the above. I was 15. It altered my trajectory, changed the way I saw the entire universe. And I was 15. I was probably a little bit too young. But I don't know if this is my first journey, but one of the very first journeys was I was 15. I was on a fair amount of LSD at a Grateful Dead concert. Me and my friends went to Dead shows. We waited in line all day to get as close as possible on the rail. We were always about the music, and felt the LSD coming on, and I was just in this peak flow state. And I remember I had this amazing kind of, well, first it was synesthesia, you know, as visions morphing with the sound and vice versa. But then I was able to do something with my ears that was just this amazing phenomenon. My consciousness turned into like this mixing board. You know, the Grateful Dead was a big band with, you know, 6 people on stage. I was able just to cut out every single band member and just hear Phil on the bass, and turn Phil down and hear just Bobby, and I could hear just, 2 drummers, I could hear just what Mickey was doing, or just what Bill was doing, and then mix them all back up together. And it was extraordinary, because, I mean, this is kind of a deadhead kind of fanaticism thing, but that's okay. But when you isolate the Grateful Dead musicians, it sounds like none of them are playing anything remotely close to what the other are playing. It sounds like complete, like, what is happening? Like, this can't possibly work, you know? But then all mixed together, somehow the sum of its parts creates this train moving down the tracks that does work, you know? But, you know, and that's actually a really powerful metaphor for so many things. The sum of its parts sometimes outweighs any singular power that be. So, yeah. All right. Well, we are going to sign books and stuff like that out there. You know, when you get your book, I guess if you do buy a book, you'll get it out by where the popcorn was, and then come to this hallway. I'll sign it. Please just, you know, sign your books and personalize it. But I wish I had time for stories for everyone. Try to refrain from any Timothy Leary stories, please. And I really want to thank Brian, Maggie, Ron, Bill, all of you guys for hosting me here in Palm Springs for this event. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, and thanks for having me. Yeah, see you guys.
So before you go, just is this on?
Oh, really quick, yeah. And if you do want to work with me in deeper, I do teach an online course that's in person. Starts again in the winter if you're interested. Okay, this is on.
Okay, looks like we're on. So before you go, again, Zach, thank you for taking us up on the request to visit us in Palm Springs. And are you interested in more? Are you interested in more presentations on psychedelic medicine, how to use it, what it's about? So one thing with the Palm Springs, let me switch microphones. One thing about the Palm Springs Psychedelic Society, our current group is really focused on healthcare providers, but we knew we were going to get to a place where we needed to expand to the community, like the other 300 global psychedelic groups around the world. We are going to need some leadership. We're going to need some support. The global groups are doing meetups. They're doing education. They're sharing. They're growing. So that's our next phase. You'll find us on LinkedIn. There's a healthcare group. If you're healthcare related, please go there. If you're not healthcare, go to the other group. A lot of the same information is shared. Again, Blue Sky, Instagram. But we hope soon to do more training and education. We have experts in microdosing. We have experts in integration. We have experts working with ketamine therapy. So we're looking very, very forward to collaborating, not just with healthcare people, but with all of you guys. I know there's a lot of questions. My patients ask me all the time about microdosing, macrodosing. How do we find people? We can't, as members of our society, provide medicine, but we can talk about it. All of us can get continuing education for therapists, medical doctors, nurses, and others. So we can talk about the process, we can plan for your journey, and we can talk about integration and help with that. But it's a whole nother tricky piece about access to the medicine and doing the medicine. But we're looking to change this, hopefully, with Decriminalize Nature, August 9th with Larry Norris. Please join us. The information will be posted online. Again, thank you so much. Thank you, Zach Leary. Thank you, Society. Appreciate it. See you again. Want to make the announcement about the list that Maggie put out there?
There's a list.
Whoops.
Semi-normal podcast.